Good morning. Welcome to day 2 of Thank God for Bitcoin, our 2023 conference. We have some people sort of slowly meandering in. Maybe 9 a.m. is a little early for our Bitcoin crowd, but people are slowly getting in. So maybe in about 90 seconds, I just want to introduce who we're welcoming to the stage. We have Clinton Donnelly coming to the stage, kind of the big boss and owner of Crypto Tax Audit. And they've been an unbelievable sponsor of ours, really kind of helping us put on this entire event. So I know that a lot of you come up to me just saying, hey, we're so thankful for Thank God for Bitcoin. We love this event. And honestly, I wouldn't be thanking me, I'd be thanking Clinton. Him and his team have been awesome, just sort of helping us put this on. And so I want to welcome Clinton to the stage, and then let's get our friends in here as well. So.
Thank you all. Thank you, David, and I also want to thank Jordan, two primary organizers here. This is such a big event, and strategically in helping to make Bitcoin and sound money a powerful tool for churches and Christians around the world. I'm really excited about the whole purpose that we have here. Real quickly about myself. I have a law degree. I have specializing in international financial regulation. I'm also a certified anti-money laundering specialist in crypto assets and an enrolled agent recognized by the IRS, and I represent taxpayers all over the world. I have clients in 71 countries. I have a whole company that works for me preparing tax returns for people. We are the largest cryptocurrency tax return preparation firm in the U.S. We do gain calculation, return preparation, the entire tax return. We prepare a tax return the way you wished it was prepared. If you knew in advance you're going to get audited. And the other thing that we do of great significance is that we actually defend people in audits before the IRS. At this point in time, I've defended people in 44 audits by the IRS of their cryptocurrency reporting. And there's nobody else out there who's done as many defense as we have. We defend people through the audit, through appeals, up to tax court. At this point in time, we have a 30% refund rate. That means the IRS came after somebody in an audit, and 30% of the time, they ended up paying. So that's the national rate is 0.5%. So this is pretty exciting stuff. We know we study the IRS. I study the IRS like a football coach studies the opposing team's football games. All right? We smell them with IRS. My wife likes to say, when the IRS calls, I put on my Southern accent, and I'm, oh yeah, no problem, and I'm watching them, so anyhow. The exciting product that we have, if you were to retain anything, is we have a service offering now where it's a monthly membership, and there's 4 different price points, and it's basically car insurance for your tax return. If the IRS audits you when you're a member, we will defend you for no additional charge throughout the entire life of the audit, appeals up to tax court if necessary. We'll do the recalculation of the gains. We'll attack the IRS's calculations. We have a lot of fun doing that. And we just defend you. All you have to pay is the monthly subscription fee, which is at the high end, which is the most popular plan, is $249 a month. But we also offer a reduced plan it's a monitoring service where we will monitor the IRS accounts that you have on a weekly basis. We can see 2 to 6 months in advance of when the IRS is going to come after you in an audit. We can see those flags in advance. We also monitor to see if, did they show that your tax return got filed? Do they think you owe money? Are there hidden refunds that you're entitled to? I had one client, he signed up and I was looking at his account and I said, I can get you a $15,000 refund. And 6 weeks later, he had a check for $15,000. So it's kind of like a credit score that you get every month from your bank. That's basically what this service is. And I'm working with Swan and some other companies. We're going to have some even lower price points. We're looking at Netflix pricing for that. So stay tuned for that offering. Let me just say, typically Bitcoiners buy cryptocurrency and they don't sell it too often. They buy Bitcoin, of course, so they're not as familiar with the tax implications. I just want to touch on this quickly. Everybody knows that when you sell Bitcoin to get dollars, that you experience hopefully a good gain, and you have to pay taxes on that gain. Most people understand that. But if you were to take Bitcoin and then buy a car with it, where you give the dealer Bitcoin directly, that too is a taxable event on the gain. Everything in the US tax code is done in terms of US dollars. So that no dollars actually happened in that Bitcoin for car transaction, it's still a taxable event and you're subject to tax on it. So I point that out to you because many people are very hopeful when, Bitcoin shoots the moon again, they can cash out some things. You will experience significant taxable events. I would say at this point in time, the IRS knows over 95% of all who the cryptocurrency traders are in the US. So just don't think that they haven't called you up, doesn't mean they don't know your number. I have a podcast called The Donnelly Show, and within a couple weeks we'll be putting out one podcast on charitable giving of Bitcoin, which there are special rules if you're going to do a charitable gift, especially if you're gifting in excess of $5,000 of Bitcoin. If you don't follow these rules, you cannot get the tax deduction. Secondly, there'll be another video on churches on how to handle a Bitcoin gift. It creates a certain amount of complexity and risk for churches, and I'll talk about that in the video, especially anti-money laundering exposure that a church might suffer. So I would, at this point in time, I'll just show you, give a little talk on the biblical perspective on taxes. And I can safely say in my life as a Christian, I have never heard a talk on this topic. So I think this will be an interesting development. And of course, taxes are one of those things that people don't like to talk about for too long, 15 minutes, and that'll be how long my talk is. So one of the questions is, and I see it all as people call me up, they tell me incredible stories, and I'll share a couple of them with you. Hopefully that'll be beneficial for you. The question on the table is, and Jordan mentioned this yesterday, is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar? We know in Matthew 22, actually in all three of the synoptic gospels, the religious and political leaders asked Jesus this famous question, and his answer left them stupefied. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? So that's still the same question we ask today. Do we have to pay taxes to the government? And anyone who's made a big gain gets really upset when they realize they have to give a fourth or a third of that money back to the government. That's very agitating. And that's both the federal, the state, and the local governments. But that's the question I'd like to explore. It was definitely an issue during the time of Jesus. People were saying, do I have to pay tax to Caesar? It was a genuine question. It wasn't just, it was on people's minds, which is why it was a great question, and still is. Many people still wrestle with the legitimacy and the obligation to pay taxes to the government or not. Here in the US, industry and IRS statistics indicate that as few as 1/4 of all crypto asset owners are reporting their income on their taxes, or even filing tax returns altogether. That's only 1/4 are, let me phrase it this way, only 1/4 of crypto asset owners are rendering unto Caesar what is Caesar's. All right, so you can catch the tension here. Where did taxes begin? Now, I'm not going to say generally taxes begin when there's a government involved, but when we look in the Bible, without looking too hard, the most overt definition or occurrence of taxation I find is in 1 Samuel 8. Up until then, the Jews were governed by judges, which were basically individuals that kind of rose up as spiritual and quasi-political leaders that would lead the country into a certain level of repentance and freedom and these sorts of things. Samuel was the last of these judges, and more warfare was occurring in Palestine, and the people rose up and said to Samuel in his old age, "Give us a king who will rule over us." Samuel goes to God and says, what gives? And God says, tell them exactly the behavior of the king who will reign over them. So Samuel goes and meets all the people in the field, and he does exactly that. He tells them, this is the behavior of the king who will reign over you. He will take your sons, take your daughters, take the best of your fields, your vineyards, your olive gardens, and your sheep, and you shall be slaves. And the people wanted this. So Samuel was telling them, this is the nature of government. The nature of governments is to take. This is the major thing that God wanted to communicate to the people. Today, we call that taking taxes. Now, in this case, they were taking of the wealth because they really didn't have an income that we measure today. But it doesn't really matter the type of tax: wealth tax, income tax, VAT tax, sales tax, probate tax, penalties, fines, fees, interest. It's all in that picture of taxing. Samuel did not make tax payment conditional on the king's good behavior. In fact, we know that Saul was not really the best of kings. Nor was Samuel's edict that you're going to have to pay taxes conditional on the soundness of the government's money supply. Neither, in the quote we had from Jesus, does he carve out any exception for the paying of taxes. Now, the first tax exemption also occurs with King Saul. Since governments have the power to tax, they also have the power to give loopholes or exemptions or whatever term you want to give it. The first biblical reference for this occurs in when King Saul is looking for someone to go up against Samson. There were three things he offered to entice someone to go against this giant. First of all, they would get great riches. Secondly, they'd get to marry his daughter. But thirdly, his father's family would be excluded from paying taxes. All right, so when you read about David, you realize he had a lifetime exemption. All right, so this is kind of exciting. But is that fair to everybody else that he should get that exemption? These are good questions. Who wouldn't like to have a lifetime exemption here? Would anyone like a lifetime exemption? Okay. Taxes are complex today. And the U.S. taxes are complex, but trust me, in other countries, they're just as weird and complex. And people, clever people, can find legal ways to reduce their tax burden. The U.S. appeals judge, Learned Hand, that was his name, Learned Hand, said, anyone may arrange his affairs so that his taxes shall be as low as possible. Nobody owes any public duty to pay more than the law demands. So yes, tax loopholes are good. We see that first example there. But how are taxes related to a sovereign God? Many Christians interpret Jesus' answer to the politicians as dividing the Christian view of money into two realms, a secular realm and a heavenly realm. They act as though their financial conduct is unrelated to their spiritual lives. When we consider that all things are subject to Christ, then we are challenged to see how taxes are integrated into our faith. The Apostle Paul in Romans 13 explains how our financial lives are inseparable from our spiritual lives. I read for you 7 verses. Let every soul be subject to the governing authorities. There is no authority except from God. And the authorities that exist are appointed by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authority resists the ordinance of God. And those who resist will bring judgment on themselves. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to evil. Do you want to be unafraid of authority? Do what is good, and you will have praise from the same. For the ruler is God's minister to you for good. But if you do evil, be afraid. For he does not bear the sword in vain, for he is God's minister, an avenger to execute wrath on him who practices evil. For because of this, you also pay taxes, for they are God's ministers attending continually to this very thing. Render therefore to all their due. Taxes, to whom taxes are due, customs to whom customs are due, fear to whom fear, and honor to whom honor. Paul helps us see Jesus' answer in a little more nuanced manner. By rendering unto Caesar what is Caesar's, we are simultaneously rendering unto God what is God's. They are not two acts, they are the same for the Christian. That's what Paul is saying. All that we have is from a sovereign God. He is our source, and he will provide all our needs, including our taxes, from his riches in Christ Jesus. Now, paying taxes is a part of the life of faith. Now, that may be more challenging than pulling a coin out of the mouth of the first fish that you catch. But that is the Christian life. Can we choose to not be tax compliant? There are people who protest paying taxes altogether. They think they are clever. The government thinks that they're tax evaders. Tax evasion is a felony. In the US, it's subject to a $250,000 fine plus 5 years in prison. Now, this happened just 2 weeks ago. On May 5th, I guess that's a week ago, in the period of 24 hours, 4 people came up to me and told me that they don't pay taxes. I have exceeded this number in other locations, but this was kind of novel. The janitor in the bathroom informed me that the IRS is a private corporation headquartered in Hong Kong, and it's run by the Chinese. I said, why was that? He said, I don't know, but they're in Hong Kong. So a podcaster came up to me and was very aggressive and told me in no uncertain terms that the 16th Amendment to the Constitution did not give the U.S. the right to tax its citizens. That's a very popular argument people have. But of course, as I just explained, it's God that gives the government the right. So a woman then came up to me and told me that the IRS had a black ops operation in the mountains around Reno, Nevada, and that they were coming after us. I said, oh, okay. I get it. Nobody likes paying taxes. And we could all probably spend the money better than the government does, all right? And governments are corrupt, and the money is spent wastefully, and that's very upsetting. I understand that frustration. That's exactly what the prophet Samuel was telling the people. Finally, a pastor proudly told me that he hadn't paid taxes or filed for the last 30 years. This was a pastor. He's leading a flock. It kind of blew me away. He believed that the IRS was a private company operating, in this case, out of the Cayman Islands. And it's been there for a long time. That's why he doesn't pay, because it's a private company, not the US government. I told him, well, the IRS is a government agency. It's a part of the Department of Treasury. And he argued on this point. And then he finally confided in me that he was nearing retirement and he wanted some advice on how he can get compliant with the tax code again, because he wanted to get Social Security checks. After, of course, he'd been stealing from the government. He thought somehow he's entitled to something. Well, I told him that his Social Security check, the amount that he would get, was dependent on how much the IRS in the Cayman Islands was depositing into the Social Security Trust Fund. He walked away. I get it. We've all had times when we feared not having enough to put food on the table, and we are offended that we have to give money to the government. It's one thing to have the taxes taken out of your paycheck automatically. You never see the money. You just get the net amount. But when you're an investor and you've had a massive gain on, say, you bought a bunch of Bitcoin at $10,000 and now you're selling it all at $300,000, then to find out that you got to pay $75,000 to $100,000 in taxes, that's real money. That hurts. That really gets you in the stomach the first time you have to do it. I had a client who came to me after he'd been my client doing his taxes for a couple years, and he came back to me and said, Clinton, I need to get straight on my cryptocurrency reporting. I made a lot of money in 2017. We did the gain calculation. He had, he had several 100,000 transactions. He was heavily into Bitcoin, Ethereum, futures. He made $16 million in gain that year, and he voluntarily said he paid $6 million to the IRS for 2017. I said, I think I know a way that you can avoid that through like-kind exchange and some other things. He goes, no, Clinton, I want to pay $6 million because I know they'll come after me. So he voluntarily did it. This last year, he made $30 million from the money that was left over after he paid taxes. So I get it. The answer to this fear that you won't have enough is not fraud. It's faith. Remember, Moses said, or it was said of Moses that he considered the reproach of Christ a greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to his reward. All right? Tax evasion flows from unbelief. Tax evasion flows from the fear of the world over faith in God's providence in our lives. I have a client who became my client after he pleaded guilty to tax evasion. He wanted to file 5 years of tax returns, which he did, plus penalties. He had 30 days to do this all in before he had to check into prison. In 2015, he had received a lot of Bitcoin directly from someone who was mining Bitcoin. These coins never had been on an exchange. They went from the miner's wallet to his wallet. In 2016, he took some of that, $250,000, and he sold it on a OTC desk. And then on his taxes, he said that he went to one of these online places where you get a pastor's certificate, and he created a little church, and he said that he gave the $250,000 to the church, but he just pocketed the money. About a year later, the two men showed up at his door. They were from the IRS. They had badges and guns on their belt. These were the IRS agents from the real government, not Hong Kong or Cayman Islands. And they told him to come downtown and talk to him, which he did with lawyers. He didn't give them any information. They told him, we're going to be watching you. A year later, he got a phone call from the district attorney's office informing him that they were sending him an indictment for tax fraud. It turned out that the IRS had discovered his Bitcoin wallet address and had dusted it with Satoshis. And every time, as you are familiar with UTXO, every time he moved something, one of these Satoshis would come out and the IRS saw everything he did. So they went after him for tax fraud. Once he got the indictment, it was just about the plea bargain. He paid $240,000, plus he went to prison for a year. He said that if he could do it all over again, he would have paid the taxes, that the gain was not worth the pain. And the way he expresses that is that if he ever gets pulled over by the police and they look at it for going over the speed limit, the policeman sees his driver's license, knows he's a felon. What are the chances that he gets off with a warning? Very small. Can financial integrity be restored? God is redeeming all things to himself. Perhaps you haven't filed or reported all your Bitcoin or other cryptocurrency gains on your taxes. Maybe you're a tax protester like the people I described. Maybe you got off on the wrong foot on your taxes and you don't know how to get back. I understand. My staff has helped people. We've done over 1,200 tax amnesty returns for people to help them get back into compliance. It's not as scary as you think. We can help you in the transition to compliance. But here at the Thank God for Bitcoin conference, we believe a transition to a sound money is the source of hope for a broken world by a corrupt monetary system. We can all amplify the hope of this power by committing to personal financial integrity. Conversely, nothing will destroy the power and impact of this conference and this mission than for it to be tarnished by association with tax evaders and tax protesters. This is especially true for the leaders in this movement. As Paul said, whoever resists the authority resists the ordinance of God, and those who resist will bring judgment on themselves. But remember what Jesus said, with God, all things are possible. To God be the glory.